Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second live PASS webinar. My name is Karen Ogle, and I'm the PASS Membership Team Lead Supervisor at Zengar. I'm joined by my colleague, Mark Nachalajan, as well as our Education Director, Dr. Lise DeLong, and our Assistant Director of Education, Mark DeLong. Today's topic, releasing expectations and tracking shifts. It was chosen by popular demand by our trainers. The presentation will be followed by an open question and answer period. However, you can enter your questions throughout the presentation in the chat box below, under Karen. I will now pass you to Dr. Lise DeLong and Mark DeLong.
Mark and I would like to thank you all for being here and thank the PASS team for inviting us to participate in these webinars. We really do enjoy them. They're a lot of fun. So we want to get started, and what we want to start with is what it means to release expectations and why this is an important part of the neurooptimal process. So let me just start with saying most of the time in our lives, we can expect the outcome of a process or an event to be within the realm of our understanding. So what we mean by that is we know that when you open up an orange or a tangerine, as this may be, you're going to find orange or tangerine slices inside. You're not going to find garlic. You just know better. You expect it differently. And usually those expectations come from a close reality to what our known experiences are. So when we are expecting a baby, we usually can expect an adorable little baby human, not a baby alien. We understand we might be surprised if there are any changes to this expectation, like maybe there's more than one baby, or maybe the gender of the baby is different than what we had expected. But we are certain that the baby is going to be a human baby. And this is probably because of all of our experiences with childbirth over thousands and thousands of years. It's molded what our expectations are. So it's very normal to have expectations typically.
So our expectations come from our knowledge, our past experiences, and the information that we've been given in the context as we're experiencing it. It is our lived experience in the moment. So many times we expect sequential steps. People think, I've started my medication for, pick one, ADHD, and the next step is to monitor these symptoms with charts, numbers, graphs, discussions with the doctor and therapist or whatever. These are our experiences. Then they wait to be told when these symptoms are better. They wait to be told they're better. Then they expect the symptoms to go away. And many times that's how clients address their neurooptimal sessions. Even trainers add to this with some expectations that they themselves impose into this relationship. Things like, well, you should see changes within 7 sessions, or you should take a total of 20 to 30 sessions. So the way the trainer speaks from that very first step with the client starts creating expectations in the client's mind. And that's really the basis of where we're going to address this meeting today. Many times the clients come into your office and they've got expectations. Because of their lived experiences, they have expectations that they want, or they've been given expectations by maybe even the person that referred them. What's very important is that with neurooptimal, we want to release these limiting expectations so we're open to the full range of possibilities.
Absolutely. So when someone expects something specific to happen, such as I have ADHD and I want, quote, the normal brain that's maybe more focused and more alert or whatever, their expectations will actually drive the success that they're having, or the success that they are having at noticing the shifts and the changes that are honestly happening kind of in the background. So everyone is on the same page. You might want to start out asking them, what do you expect to happen when you train with Neurooptimal? How will you know if you've achieved that expectation? And what happens if your expectations are not met? And then I would take some time and talk through how to help them release some of those expectations. First, share with them that it's best to release those expectations. Explain that we do not know what will happen while they are training. I know that can be scary for a lot of people. However, if they understand the neurooptimal philosophy and what dynamical neurofeedback is really all about, then they will just be excited, as you are, to see these little shifts and surprises that will happen as they occur. Help them understand that training is different for everyone, and expecting something specific to happen really decreases the ability to see those shifts in other areas that as they are happening. We also many times will notice that a spouse or a family member will notice a shift before the client does. And that's always something that's interesting to pay attention to as well. I do think the more in tune we are to our body, it really does kind of play a part in determining how you notice those shifts. So it's really important for you to use the My Journal tools, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, to document some of those subtle changes so that you can remind your client as you're going through them, the changes that have been made.
So it's really important from our perspective in the very first, what we call new client consultation meeting, the first contact with the clients, to make sure to explain how Neurooptimal is a dynamical training process. And although shifts happen quickly, they may be small, and those can sometimes take several small shifts before you add up to one larger, more noticeable shift. So we might say things like we're a training program. Change happens quickly in small increments. Understanding we don't know what their end result will be. We always stress that we don't know the path. We just know that there is a path. Since we're measuring movement or transitions, we're not going towards any specific state or quote norm. We're training towards flexibility and resilience, basically this flow of movement. So this is the time right up front here to discuss that we're going to be looking for shifts and what they are and how to look for them. We're going to be looking for physical, emotional response and reaction times and cognitive changes, language changes, behavioral shifts, comments from spouses and family members. So the individual opens up the relationship in a very open-minded way with the idea that shifts can in fact be everywhere.
And they usually are everywhere.
Where we least expect them sometimes. So when our perspective has changed, we find that we don't need to expect something specific. We understand that anything is possible. And Neurooptimal is a perspective change in that way. And it's important that we educate people also what not to expect. Our job as a trainer is to look for and anticipate that there will be shifts, even though they may be subtle. Like we said, it may take some time to build up from those subtleties. So we may notice that old patterns start to exhibit again as we shift after we've reacted to them. We start to institute a new pattern. So we now respond differently than we would have in the past.
So I want to take a moment and kind of talk about what constitutes a problem. A problem is something that is not wanted by the individual. It is not desired. So although we may have many times that someone will explain that that this is an undesirable action that they have going on or a problem that they don't want, when you think about it, many of those problems are things that you do need. You need them in a different aspect or a different way in your life, such as the example here in this picture, we all want hair, just not on our lip if we're a female. But having hair on your head, if you're a male, no offense, or having hair on your lip if you're a male may be important to you. We all want the ability to sleep, but not if we're driving a car down the road during the day. We all may want to stay focused and alert and attentive to details. Who wouldn't want that during the day?
During the day.
But not at night when you're trying to relax and get ready to fall asleep. So, every undesirable problem may be something that we want at a different time. So when we talk about Neuroptimal as training flexibility and resilience, or as a method of flow or moving, it's really from the undesired to the desired whenever it is appropriate. In the US, we have something that's called Cracker Jacks. These were little boxes of caramel corn with nuts inside, really delicious little things that we all had as kids. And maybe in other countries, you have something similar for your breakfast cereal or something, but they always had this little small surprise down in the bottom of the box. You never knew what you were going to get. So I want you to think of shifts in that same way. They occur as you're training with Neuroptimal as just little surprises. Our central nervous system will provide these little surprises the more we train, but we don't know what they will be. So what we think of as undesirable and therefore problem are possibly some of the shifts that might happen for you during your training with the central nervous system moving away from discomfort. And as Mark said in the slide before, creating a new desired pattern using that flexibility and resilience. So we never notice those little surprises in the moment, or we might not notice them in the moment. However, as a trainer, you can help people notice those and open their awareness to the fact that there is a very diverse group or diverse way of getting these little surprises. So rather than being focused on the old patterns and beliefs, we really want to make sure that we're paying attention to all the small shifts and changes that are occurring that we didn't even know were possible.
So dynamical systems are chaotic with unlimited possibilities. This is why we want to release all these set expectations. I go back just a few words to unlimited possibilities. We need to be open to what we don't even know to expect. So linear systems have very repeatable patterns, and they're limited by measuring amplitude and frequencies. And they encourage very specific norm-based states, right? So they move towards a specific state, and the opportunity for change, therefore, is very limited. They've opened their protocols with a very limited belief, a very limited expectation. And this is how side effects occur. When we're encouraging the brain or central nervous system to function at a specific, quote, norm, which may not be the best for that particular person, and probably isn't the best for that particular person. So this takes us back to, let's learn to maintain a sleep state or maintain a focus state. It's difficult to discern when you want that desired state from when it is undesired, and they're just pushing towards it no matter what. So some people might ask, how do I know when I'm finished? How will I know if we're there? It's important that we're not moving towards a destination. We are on a journey. As we say many, many times, that journey is our moving away from discomfort, right? Not towards a particular destination the way a linear system would take you there. And it's a process. We're always changing, always evolving, and there's no perfection or norm that tells us we've arrived. Instead, we continue this journey of training, this journey of dynamic change, dynamical change, actually, changing because of the change. So people may ask, do I have to do this forever? When will I know when I'm finished? Really common questions. It kind of depends on what hurdles they're at and where they are in their journey and when they get to a more comfortable spot. But I think the questions of when am I finished are a really linear question. And instead, I think we need to think about it like, if you feel your brain isn't responding in a way that it can, or it used to, or you'd like it to, time to do a session. If you think your fuse is a little shorter than it used to be, if you're reacting rather than taking time to respond, if you're falling back on old patterns that you thought had changed, all that's a very good indication that probably time to do a session. And life continues to change. So our need for sessions and our need for that training also changes along with it. If you've had a new baby come into your life and now you need more sleep than ever, you're exhausted all the time to do a session.
And maybe more than one session.
Maybe a continuation of sessions.
Whatever you decide, though. So Mark brought up the topic of side effects, and so I want to touch on that for just a moment. Side effects come from something that has physiologically induced change. So it can be medication, it can be entrainment. Sometimes we have electrical or vibration mats, electrical stimulation of some sort. All of those can create the way the central nervous system is going to respond. Neuroptimal does not induce or force any change. Therefore, when someone says they had an experience that was maybe too powerful, perhaps created a shift that they reacted to in an uncomfortable manner, then it really is more like a side journey, as the co-founders of our program, Dr. Sue and Val Brown, call it. Our central nervous system notices the information that it receives, and then it communicates and responds to the shifts and changes, and then notices those differences and moves away from discomfort. Someone might respond to these perceived changes using old patterns, possibly due to fear or anxiety, or maybe because the old pattern was useful to them at some point in their life. And the change was just receiving information. So if that were the case, they may go on a side journey and do an old pattern that they haven't done for a long time. With a linear system, though, they are augmenting and inhibiting very specific protocols or frequencies that will push the system, the central nervous system, into doing something different. It forces a change. And those are definitely side effects. It's important to remember that at this time, I think that in the early days, when Val Brown was first creating this concept of dynamical neurofeedback, he was the first person in the field to actually acknowledge that there are specific trauma frequencies. So it's important to know that as he's created each rendition of Neuroptimal, that has been a very important aspect to the creation. So it's imperative for us to understand that the biggest reason that the founders, both Val and Sue Brown, created this process was to train away from any side effects that the linear field was possibly inducing. So together, the Browns discovered that everyone was different, and moving someone towards a norm of what a clinician seems the best state or frequency for all was not in anyone's best interest.
So why do some people take these journeys? A lot of times it is
You mean the
because
side journeys?
these side journeys.
Right, because
These side
Neuroptimal
journeys.
journey, we're all on together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Why do people take these side journeys?
Right, thank you.
A lot of times it's because they have very strong beliefs that the outcome will be either this or it's not working. Here again, the word expectations that we started this session with.
Yeah.
They have the expectation that I will sleep through the night or this isn't working, that I'll score higher on a biology course or this isn't working, that everyone will like me or this isn't working. And they're so black and white, on or off, that they don't take into account the shifts and the movement towards those goals. And those aren't restricted to the client that's coming into the session for training. Many times it is the trainer themselves that's created a belief at the beginning that we must do, because you're like this, I need to do longer sessions with you. Because you're like this, I need to do shorter sessions. Some people have said, well, I see in you, you need to stop drinking coffee, or you need to take fish oil, or I mean, the number of these things we've seen that trainers impose on their clients because it worked one time is just amazing. And again, we drop back to this: everyone is different. So
you have to wonder, where do these beliefs come from? Well, my belief is, my thought is on this, they come from the stories we tell ourselves, and they come from the stories that we were told, and they come from all of our experiences that we've had, and they come from society and the stories that we're taught when we're young, and come from stories that we made up to protect ourselves when we were going through something hard or difficult or rough. So sometimes when we don't understand exactly how something works, and neurooptimal can be difficult to understand all of that, the brain very naturally creates a story in our mind, and that story may offer some odd beliefs, such as the client has migraines, and when I offered them a drink of warm tea before their session, they really calmed down. So I repeated the warm tea with the next person that came in with migraines, and I found that it's helping them as well. And therefore, out of the blue, a belief was created, and that belief was continued with all of the trainer's clients with migraines. So they come about honestly.
So how do we measure these patterns of change? It's pretty easy. We ask them what's changing in their life. We notice and compare their demeanor, their stance, their attitude, emotional regulation, posture even. Lisa likes to talk about shoulders being raised versus shoulders relaxed.
Clenching jaws. Yeah.
We look back on why they came in the first place. It wasn't probably that they had a disorder. Okay, it was because of a specific problem, something they did not want. They may think of that as their disorder, but in this realm, autism isn't the problem. It's the lack of empathy, lack of communication, inappropriate outbursts. These are the problems they're living with on a day-to-day basis. It's all about the lived experience versus a comparison of norms. So it's not numbers, it's not charts, not tests. It's their feelings, their results, their outcomes, the important quality of their life changes. That's where we're looking for the impact and the shifts.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So change is movement, and it's happening all the time. And as Val Brown says to this, it's practically impossible to not change. We can't not change. That's a major facet of a dynamical system, which is what we all are. We are in constant change. It takes a lot of effort to try to fight that change.
So how do we pay attention? How do we track the change with My Journal tracking tools? We really do encourage everyone that starts using Neuroptimal to start looking inward, to feel the differences, to notice change as information. It's not good information. It's not bad. It's not right. It's not wrong. It's just information. The more we can notice that and document that in a way that we see and feel the change is happening all the time, the better we're going to be at noticing the small shifts away from our discomfort. And our discomfort, remember, is the problem. So we're going to constantly be moving away from that. And we know that because the central nervous system is self-organizing, it's self-healing. It has an intrinsic wisdom that we were luckily all born with, and not the alien in the beginning, but that human baby was born with. The central nervous system is dynamical. It's responding to information and therefore is ever changing. It's constantly evolving with absolutely no values. Well, I don't mean that in a moral way. It has values in a moral way. It's just, it doesn't have specific norms and values. Well, and at the same time, it's moving infinitely and cycling all the time while it's self-regulating. So we don't need charts, graphs, or numbers to get in the way of what our central nervous system can incredibly do if given the trust to do it. So how do we measure the change with Neuroptimal? We ask the clients to fill out the checklist, so we have a reference to use to notice the differences. These are not symptoms. They're not really diagnosis. They are clients' main undesired problem. So once they have noted that undesired problem on their checklist, then we transfer that information over to the tracker. So the way we're using this journal checklist is we ask the clients to go over their undesired areas that they want to monitor. And then together, we pick 3 to 5 different things that are their top undesirable problems. And we transfer those to the tracker. So we actually use this list as a preliminary guideline to get the journal started. Then we repeat that at different intervals and monitor those changes using our diffs: duration, intensity, frequency, and hopefully the shift, which will shift it right out of there. So the tracker can be used a little like this. You can, with that number 1 undesired problem, such as, let's just make one up, I have problems with sleep. Then you write down underneath that more specifically what problems you actually feel you are having with sleep. What makes it a problem? And it may be that you have to think about it in terms of what would need to happen for you to feel your sleep is better. And so then you have 5 little categories under there. You can say, and these are all made up from in my mind, so they can be totally different, but fall asleep quicker, stay asleep longer, stop getting up to urinate in the middle of the night, stop grinding your teeth, feel refreshed when I wake. You might even walk or talk in your sleep, whatever you see as being an undesirable problem that has to do with one of your top 3 issues of having problems with sleep. Now, you make sure you write down in that moment the duration, how, the intensity and frequency, how often they're happening, how intense that is, how strong that problem is. And is it happening every single night, or is it happening once in a while? So you're using those diffs at the same time.
And if I can interrupt, that really helps you in future meetings, because now you've brought out 5 or 6 different metrics that are defining for you, I have problems with sleeping.
It's not one big
So,
general.
so when
issue,
you're
yeah.
talking about the diffs in this regard, the first one Lisa said was fall asleep quicker. Well, at the very upfront, you said, I want to fall asleep quicker because it's taking me 2.5 hours to fall asleep. So the next time you go through it, it's, an hour and a half to fall asleep. Still not good, but much better. That's the difference in
Right.
the diffs. What you're monitoring, it is that shift.
Absolutely. Thanks. Then after an agreed upon time, maybe it's a month, maybe it's 6 sessions, whatever you and your client agree to, ask them to fill out the checklist again and to revisit this tracker. It's really interesting because many times I'll have people that seriously, they don't even remember that was an issue the first time, and yet that was the worst problem they had. And so it gives them the opportunity to kind of reevaluate and look at the differences as they go. And then you fill out the checklist again and you revisit that tracker. And remember, you are able to use those trackers for every single top problem that you have, and as you go along. So as you fill out the diffs, and each time keep in mind some of these questions, have they changed? And ask your client about that. Can you mark any of them off of your checklist? Does the client feel any of the shifts as they occur in their day-to-day life, which is really, that lived experience is the reason we're doing it. So that's very important. But if they still feel as though they can't fall asleep at night, but you've tracked that now they fall asleep an hour earlier than they used to, then that movement, that flow of what is happening is going to be encouraging to them and exciting as that little surprise in the bottom of the Cracker Jacks box, our CNS box. And then the tracker can just be used on a regular basis as you go.
So it's easy to use the My Journal tracking forms for rentals as well. And I always get drug in to talk about rentals, but what we found in our history of renting is that our renters are far more successful if we stay in touch with them to even remotely, meaning from a distance, help them notice their shifts and walk them through what's changing in their life. You can use, videos, written journals, audio journals, any different method that would help you communicate with that particular person. I'm often asked, can't we use an electronic form and then give them the graph at the end? That is such a linear way of looking at it. We brought it into numbers, and it only mentions change, not even that the change is good. And so
and more than that, I think that when you do that, it really takes away from that intrinsic value that you get when you listen to your CNS.
Exactly. We don't want to pull them away from that aspect, that they're learning to rely on their own central nervous system to make these intrinsic decisions based on the information. If we're only validating the information through a graph, then we're not trusting their body. Go back to, a while ago when I said, they're waiting for someone to tell them they're better. And we need to move them away from that to, trust internally how you're feeling and notice that change. I can't tell you you're better, but let us help you track those shifts.
Yeah.
And know that their central nervous system is now responding, and they're noticing that it's responding in the way it's designed to function. And so when we're saying we need to see proof, which takes them back to that linear belief that someone else or something else must validate the change. And it truly is all internal. So, really, after all, isn't about those numbers. No one's ever come into our office and said anything remotely like my 3 and 5 hertz activity in my left hemisphere appears to be at too strong of an amplitude. And that's something that a linear system could say, well, here's what your 3 and 5 are at, and here's what they're at now. They talk about their feelings and how they're having trouble sleeping, or how they're having trouble relating or responding or reacting or whatever. The issues to monitor are how it's affecting their lived experience, not a random number.
Absolutely.
So the central nervous system shifts and responds as it witnesses information. And although the CNS may take a, quote, side journey, the body will instinctively recognize that the old patterns have no function in their lives. And so it'll quickly, respond and be back on this path of personal transformation. And it's important to understand that this path isn't, point A to point B, very linear, as we've kind of throw this linear term out again. It is, this kind of a path. If you ever go somewhere, it's never linear.
All right, guys, we have come to the end. We want to thank you all again for being here. We hope that this topic has given you a lot of information about releasing expectations, and maybe given you some information on how to use the journal tracking tools in a different way. So we will pass this back over to Karen, and we're excited to see you guys another time.
Thank you, Lise. Thank you, Mark. I was going to mention as well, for anybody that joined a bit late, the topic today is releasing expectations and tracking shifts, just in case you were a little confused midway. But we would now like to open the floor for questions. So we would invite you to enter your questions in the chat box under Karen, and I'll try to get through as many as I can in the next 20 minutes that we have here. So please type away. And I just wanted to mention, Lise, just a comment, because I was listening intently on the presentation, and it's very true what you say, that some people are so in tune with their bodies, and therefore they can notice the most minute shifts. And then there's others that just, they're not, and just the way they are. So they have a trouble detecting and noticing these shifts. One of the questions I know we get at the head office all the time, you touched on it briefly, is how often should a trainer use the journals, and what are they tracking? From what I understood, just to recap, is we're tracking any undesirable problems that the client has come in for. And as far as how often a trainer should use the journals, that's really dependent on the client and the trainer together determining what they feel is best. Is that right? Just to...
That's exactly right. And that is exactly right. You can track things that are not on the checklist. The checklist is a kind of an accumulation of a variety of different things that people normally would complain about, or or see as a problem, or could have a problem with. But it could be, honestly, that you just get so frustrated every time you have to pick up your child's underwear on the floor, but they won't do it, and that is your undesired problem. And if that's the case, then there's probably some things that once you start using Neuroptimal, you're going to feel so much better that the underwear is not a big deal anymore. It's just one of those things that you can do. Any problem that client comes in with is okay.
And that list is just to prompt the thought process.
Yes.
And to recognize that basically no clients ever come in and had just one issue.
Never.
You never see just one of those circles. This is where the linear systems actually focus all of their attention on, is give me one issue and we're going to attack that. And it really...
one diagnosis.
Or one diagnosis.
Yeah, it's really what they do.
And so this is just to bring up the thought that there are many different things going on in your world. And even though you have a primary complaint, we may see the shifts and the changes in some of these other places first, even though all you really came in for was you wanted this better. I want to sleep better.
Yeah.
But
look what happened with
Yeah.
your child's underwear on the floor.
yeah,
I mean, all of a sudden anxiety goes away and all these other issues start to melt. So-
Because that is another thing that we get questioned on as well, is why are there so many undesirable problems on the checklist? Why are there 100, and some of them even sometimes seem unrelated to neurofeedback? So why?
Nothing is ever unrelated when you are talking about something that is a problem to an individual, because we're talking about flexibility and resilience to get you through the problem that you have. We really could have probably put 500 things on there had we wanted to really do more than one page. But so 100 is not a problem. They all are there just to remind you that, is this an issue? Is this an issue? Which one? And it really may be none of them on there. You may have found problems in your life that we don't even put on that sheet. And that's okay too. Use the tracker instead.
I have a question here. When a person is a user of, for example, regular THC vaping, how can this potentially impact the session? Or would it?
Yet they were there.
they might get very hungry.
Yeah. It really doesn't. You can come in with any brain and you're still working on movement. You're not working on any one specific thing. It's when you start becoming this flexible and resilient person that everything else tends to work better, because the central nervous system is noticing it now.
And this is an important aspect of the basis of Neuro-Optimal. And you'll hear this in some other webinars and things, but Neuro-Optimal meets that client where they are.
Absolutely.
And that where they are may be high, may be drunk, may be sleep deprived, may be anxious,
Special needs. It doesn't matter.
Whatever.
Brain
And
injury.
so that's the math that's going on within Neuro-Optimal as it molds itself to where that person is in that moment. And then that also allows the change, because it's constantly meeting that person where they are. So it's allowing them to change week to week, day to day, and also even within a session. So, someone that's a heavy user of THC, it's going to meet them there. They probably, what we've seen in our experience is they won't feel that need to be as heavy a user, because they are moving away from discomfort, getting to a more comfortable spot, not self-medicating as much. It's amazing to watch the shifts with those type clients.
Yeah, that is true.
Even though they come in high. It's an amazing thing.
Another question here. If someone asks, can this help a condition, let's say seizures, how would you answer this type of question as a trainer?
We talked a little bit about that in the past webinar that we did. And I think changing people's language from the very, very, very beginning is the most important thing. Just as, neuro-linguistic programming, you sit in the same position they are, you move them back to being more relaxed, and you kind of use their physiology in that way. You also do that with their language. So if they're coming in and talking about seizures and seizing and all of that, what is the actual underlying problem? Is it the seizures, or is it the fact that the parents don't really have a lot of control over the child during that time? They're starting to urinate when they have a seizure. They are defecating when they have a seizure. It happens all the time. They choke on food. There's a lot of other little bitty issues and problems and undesirables that go along with the seizure. We're not here to fix anyone. this system is not here to fix anyone. We're offering a system to a large group of people, we hope, in hopes that people will be able to transition and flow better with their daily life in a way that is easier to manage for them. So, I think it's just real important to not follow suit with them and talk about disorders, but instead change that conversation to neurooptimal conversation. I understand that seizures are maybe what brought you here, but let's talk about what seizures mean to you. How is that affecting your day-to-day life? And just change the conversation, and then stick with your changed conversation instead.
And let's track that.
And let's track those.
And I think an important way to respond to that question almost immediately is about how neurooptimal is diagnostically agnostic. And we talk about this constantly. I have this, what is neurooptimal going to do about that? Neurooptimal doesn't care about how we fill in that first blank. It is agnostic to that point. It does not care what your diagnosis is. Here again, like my last comment, it's going to meet that brain, that cortical activity, that central nervous system where it's at. If that activity is a brain that is prone to seizures, it's going to respond to that. It's going to rely on the innate ability of that central nervous system to still do what it does
And
move away from discomfort.
Yeah.
That moving away from discomfort is going to result in possibly less seizures, possibly shorter seizures, possibly less intense seizures. We don't know, but we've seen all that, but we don't know what this person's path is going to be.
Yeah.
But it's going to move away from discomfort because it almost can't not change.
Perfect. Okay. Another question. How do I handle a client that says, I don't feel any different after running 10 sessions? Or I felt a number. Sorry?
They had an expectation.
They did. They
But
expected.
go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Well, the second part was, or I felt a number of shifts after the first few sessions, and now I have kind of plateaued.
And people don't plateau. Change is always happening. It will always happen. What I would say is more than likely they, meaning the team, the trainer and the client, or the trainer that rented them the system, or wherever they got the system from and are getting the sessions, that little team has not documented enough evidence of change for that person to believe he is changing, because that person is one that doesn't feel internally the changes yet. And so I would highly recommend that as trainers, we really get on board with that from day one, that we not only explain how this system works for the individual, but also how important it is. And the screen that Mark did with, videotape it, audio tape it, do whatever kind of journaling is easiest for that person. Maybe they just text you and you just have got this huge stream of text on your phone. Whatever works for that person to be able to share with you how things differ, because it might seriously only be a difference in the way they are reacting when they're out driving, during the day. They're not so mad all the time, or they're not so frustrated, and things that they wouldn't normally ever say that Neurooptimal fixed or helped or did anything with, affected in any way. And so, I really think, number one, that's it. Two, Mark is so right. This person came in with expectations. Whether a trainer gave them the expectations that you ought to notice something in 10 sessions, or whether or not this person somewhere in the back of their head believed that within 10 sessions, that's enough time that I should feel it. I should notice a change. Maybe, but maybe not. We just don't know how your body is going to react. And if it did take some side journeys, well, and the other thing to remember is you will never have the same session ever, ever, ever again. So what you have the first time, you will never have a fourth or fifth or sixth or 20th time. Every session will be different. And when you had a big release and a big change, that might have been all your body ever needed. That was a big release. And now all the other things are just going to be little subtle things that you may or may not notice so well.
And in that particular case, the client is probably laser focused on one issue.
Yeah.
I still can't,
Yeah,
and
Mark was saying earlier.
yet, all these other things are changing in the background, and had the plan been laid early that we're going to be looking for changes in your life, in your world, outside of this one thing that you keep coming back to, because we don't know that that's the first thing that's going to change. We're going to start to see changes in that. And it's amazing how many times once you get good at this, and it is kind of an art form, when they
Definitely
say, I've done 10 sessions and I don't feel any different. And you've documented, you've made notes, you've remembered that really, after you came in on the 6th session, or, there was that point where you said, that guy flipped you off while you were driving and you didn't respond the way you normally do. Or you said you're falling asleep quicker. Is that not the case? I mean, maybe we're not, don't stay laser focused on this top one. You evidently needed to go through these subtle changes before that's the discomfort that you're going to move away from. We just don't know,
And that also, that undesired problem that he was paying attention to may not be really a problem. It may honestly be that that's the one thing he could say or think of in the moment and wrote down, but now that these other things have changed, that's really not that big of a deal to him anymore.
Okay, a person asked if it can help with
Yeah.
neuropathy. There we go. Again, do we always move away from discussing any conditions, or more like, I don't know, however? Like, is it better to say, I don't know, however, or?
Well, I think we really do use neuroptimal language as much as we can, because it really does set the stage. And, the other thing is that sometimes you may think the language that Neuroptimal has come up with is kind of more jargonish, but it's not the case. It came up with it because it is the most specific thing that you can say, flexibility and resilience. But, that is exactly why they go in and out of every single state without getting stuck somewhere anymore. Neuropathy is one, sadly, that I know way too much about. And to be very honest, again, when the central nervous system is functioning and feeling good and doing what it needs to do, those little nerve endings that are just hyper excitable start to relax, and you don't notice that there's shifts that just naturally occur because the central nervous system notices that's a discomfort, that's uncomfortable for me, and it moves away from it, and it doesn't allow it to be. Most of the time when we have disorders or symptoms like that, it's because we have been so hyper focused on a way out of that we don't really allow the central nervous system to give us the way out of that. We are cognitively so focused on it. And the more we can let go of it cognitively and allow our central nervous system to self-heal, to do the things that it knows how to do, the more apt it is to function accurately, comfortably.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Just one question, because Mark, you were talking about rentals, and I know we have a lot of trainers that are renting out systems. And a question is, if they're using technology to kind of report back and check in on their client regularly, and that's to be determined between the trainer and the client. But have you ever, in your experience, noticed if the trainer does not do these follow-ups or does not have clients complete the journaling, that their experience tends to be much different than someone that is? I guess I'm just trying to bring about the importance of using the tracking.
We've experienced that too. You know, from the renters, from our perspective of renting, there are people that don't want the oversight. You know, they as much as you try to be involved, they don't want you involved.
They think they don't want the oversight.
Yeah,
They don't understand.
whatever, but
How it can help.
and that's how I know, just from our own experience, that the ones that we stay more in touch with, more in communication with, they are the most successful. The ones that don't want any of that seem to be the least successful. And maybe that's to the point of they don't use it as much, possibly because they don't have someone saying, oh, I'm going to have to call them, you know, we're going to talk at the end of the week, I better get some sessions in. I've rented to people for months and had them do 2 sessions, which is an extremely high cost per session.
You know,
But-
I also think that it's twofold. It helps the client if you stay in touch, but it helps you stay in touch. So when they do come back, or if they do, because it is a belief that they will all be this way, but if they come back and they say, I haven't made changes in 10 sessions, then you can say, well, let's go back and look through some of your documented, you know, tracking tools that you've been doing. So it really does help. And I think explaining that in the beginning as to why this is important for us to do does help. If that person, though, just doesn't have the time to be documenting it, writing it down, then many times those same people are very willing to either call or have a video recording or just audio record, you know, so try to get creative with them if you can. And maybe that's just one of the checklists that you give them when you give them the unit. How would you like us to stay involved while you're gone? As though it's an assumption that we're going to. So I think that there are some techniques that you can do that will help you stay involved. And Mark can go over those when he does his,
I guess in June.
in June.
Perfect. So that's really all the time we have for questions for today. I do want to mention, if you're interested in finding out where you can find the My Journal checklist and tracker, that can be found on our website, either under the New User Resources tab, or when you log into your PASS account, you can also find it under the Tools and Resources icon under Business and Office Resources tab. So we have recorded this webinar for today. We will make it available on our Facebook support group with French subtitles. It'll be available in a week or so. And we'd like to thank you, Dr. Lise DeLong, thank you, Mark DeLong, and we invite you to join our next live Q&A. It's scheduled for late June, and the topic will be creating and building your NeurOptimal rental business. Mark DeLong. And the details will be posted closer to the date in the PASS Tips email and as well as on our Facebook support group. I want to mention, if you did not if we did not answer your question, you can always email education@neuroptimal.com and they'll be happy to answer your question. So thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.